Hello, this is Nathan, and I'm going to teach us how to paint a sunset today. I'm going to show us an example of one I did a little while back. So this is a painting I did from a photo reference, and that's what I do with most of my paintings, is I will paint from a photo and try to make it as realistic as I can. This one today we're just going to make up. It'll be an imaginary one. Now the cool thing about sunsets is that you can really play with the colors you want to use. So you can adjust to whatever you want the sunset to look like. All you have to really pay attention to are a few rules, such as the warmer colors where the sun would be, and the farther away you get from the sun, the cooler the colors get. Also, you start with the lighter and you go darker. It's really about all you have to follow to make your sunset look realistic. Otherwise, you can use whatever colors you want. Now first, we want to start with a drawing of some sort. Just to play with the ideas of what we want in our painting. Mostly what I did was play with what kind of tree I wanted. Really wanted to make sure I have that water in there so I can have the reflections. Alright, so I'm just roughly putting in my horizon line. Not a very big deal if it's not exactly what I want right now, because I'll be painting over it and adjusting it anyways. So it's rough. The lower my horizon line, the more attention I'm giving to the sky, because there's a bigger chunk of it in my drawing, in my painting. If I were to put the horizon line up farther up the page, then most of my attention would be near the bottom where my water and everything is. Alright, now I'm going to do a little outline of my faraway mountains. I want to make sure they're fairly random so it looks realistic. Just a rough drawing. Alright, and then I want to add some depth to my drawing. So I'm putting this hill in that's kind of close by. That way I'll push those mountains back a little ways. That's how you show that distance, by having faraway things and then closer things overlapping. And then I want a tree, just blocking it in. Just the general area where I want it to be. It might move left to right as we paint. And then I want to block in where my reflections are. The neat thing about doing a painting with reflections is a lot of what you painted in one area will just be duplicated in the lower area. Okay. And that's about all I want to draw on my canvas, because I will paint over it. And the next part is the painting. So for paint, I have white. I have Payne's gray, which is just a fancy black. It just has a little bit of blue in it to give it a little bit of life. This is ultramarine blue, but you can use any blue you want. This is kind of an orange. It's a yellowy red. And then this is a cool red with some blue in it. And then this is a warm yellow with a little bit of red in it. Again, you can use whatever colors you want. That is fine. And then I have two brushes. I'm keeping it simple. I've got a thicker one for more broad areas. This is the one I'll probably use for the majority of the painting. Here's a medium one for a little smaller details like the mountains and such. And then if I want to get some really small details, I have this little one. I try to stick with the biggest possible brush I can for the longest amount of time. That way my painting won't look overworked. What I want to start with is the lighter areas. So let's start with the sun, kind of in the center area. What I want to do is I'm taking that big brush and I'm taking a little bit of yellow, And I apologize for my camera work. This is my first art video, and if it doesn't look exactly professional, I'm going to try harder next time and try to learn from this video and keep improving. So, as you see, it's a lot of white, a little bit of yellow. And I'm taking a brush and I'm just making a decision. Where do I want that sun to be? I'm using quite a bit of paint. With acrylic, the thicker the paint, the better. It acts a lot like oil in that way. If I do something up in the sky and there's a reflection, I have to do the same thing in the water. So that will be the lightest value in my painting. What I want to do now is take a lot of my yellow, and while my paint is wet, I want to take that yellow and I want to start working it into that wet paint. The great thing about acrylic is you can mix right on the canvas, but unlike oil, acrylic dries pretty fast. So the faster I go, within reason, the better. Because once this paint dries, I will not be able to mix it on the canvas. And I'll have to mix colors on the palette. It's a little bit of a slower process. And I also find if I am painting faster, I second guess myself a lot less, and the painting looks a lot more natural. Alright, there's my yellow. I like how that's turning out. Also, as you can see, I leave my brush pretty dirty while I'm going from color to color. Especially in the sunset where I want a nice blend, I'm not going and cleaning the brush between yellow and red and orange and so on. I want those colors to blend together, and so I'm leaving my brush pretty dirty. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking this warmer red. So the warmer red just has a little bit of yellow in it, and I'm going to take the yellow as well and mix just a little bit more of a yellowy orange, and then I'm going to take that and I'm going to do the same thing where I'm working that color into the wet color that's already on the canvas. You can see that yellow that was already there gets incorporated into this new color. And I do light brush strokes to really work those colors together. And I might go back and reblend a little bit. And you see how my yellow is already starting to dry a little bit, so I want to take some more yellow and just add it in there. There we go. And then I want to blend it a bit. Like that. Okay. And anything I do up here, I want to do down in the water as well. So I'm just mixing that yellowy orange again. And then adding it down into the water. Letting it mix with that yellow. And I'm dry brushing a little bit. That's when you take a brush that doesn't have very much paint on it and doesn't have any water, and just scrubbing the paint in. Alright. Now if I get little areas like that where maybe I didn't intend to have that dark red right there in the yellow, I might leave it though, because it's kind of an interesting accident there. It kind of adds something, like there's a cloud over there. So I might do that down here as well, just to duplicate that. So I like that. And now what I want to do is I'm going to take the cooler red I have, this red that has a little bit of blue. You could also just take that red you have and add a little bit of blue to it, just to cool it off a little. And what I want to do, same thing, it's just another layer of color, working it into that more orangey color. So as I go away from the sun, I get cooler. Colors get cooler. Okay. Making sure I can't really tell where one color starts and another ends. Same thing down in the water. Since my water section is smaller than my sky section, I'm not going to see all the colors that I'll be putting into the sky. It's going to be cut off a little bit. Alright, so that is blended pretty nicely. I don't want to work it too much because it will start to look a little too thought out. I want to keep it loose. Alright. I like that. And now what I want to do is I want to make a purple. Again, I'm not cleaning my brush. I haven't yet. I'm going to take this blue, take the cooler red, mix them together. So that's pretty dark. That almost looks like the same value as the black. And I want that black to be the darkest thing on the painting. So I'm going to add a little white to my purple, just so we're not going that dark already. That's a pretty nice purple. I like that. If your purple looks a little different than mine, that is completely okay. And even if that purple I put down, I wasn't a big fan of it, and I only found that out once I put it on the canvas, that's okay. Especially with acrylic, because you can paint over it and you can adjust the colors until you are completely happy with it. So I'm working that purple into the red. Make sure we cover up that canvas really well. So I'm going to use a little more paint. And I'm going to start doing these little circles just to work that color in a little bit, especially once the paint starts to dry more and more. You have to put a little more pressure on the brush to get that paint to mix. I'm using it, adding a little bit more texture. The more texture in the sky, the more your eye kind of gets interested in that area. If it was just a solid, smooth transition, wouldn't be quite as interesting. And I might even go back and smooth it out a little bit. Painting is a continual process. You just keep adding and changing things until you are happy with it. Watercolor is a little less forgiving in that way, because once it's on the paper, it's a lot more difficult to adjust things. Whatever I did in the sky, I have to do in the water where it reflected. Okay. Add a little bit there. Okay. And what I'm doing is I'm painting a little bit, and then I will stop and kind of look from a distance at it and just back away from it a little bit and see what I think. That way I have more opportunity to self-evaluate and adjust. If I were to just paint everything with my nose in the canvas for the entire time, I wouldn't really know what I have until I finished. And I would rather be able to adjust as I go than find out I made a bunch of mistakes throughout and not knowing until the very end. Okay. Get a little bit of purple right there. So I like how that's turning out. Some interesting textures there. And what I want to do is this upper area will be the darkest part of my sky because it's the farthest part away from the sun. So I'm going to take this blue and I might take that red again and make a darker purple than I had. A purple that has a little more blue in it too. And I'm going to finish off this sky. Working that darker color into that wet purple that's already on the canvas. Using those little circles helps to work that paint in and to give some interesting textures. Going back in with that darker purple. Lots of blue, a little bit of red. I don't want it to be too dark yet because I have things to paint over the top of it. I want to make sure it's lighter than what I have to put in front. And I want to make sure I'm covering my canvas. I don't want any blue, or sorry, any white to show through. And just little circles. Just to work that in. Okay, now what I might do, take my brush and just lightly do a dry brush over everything just to blend it a little bit more. This paint is already drying quite a bit, so I'm limited to what I can do. Sometimes you can get lucky and you're able to change things a little bit. Alright. Now maybe I want some clouds in there. Maybe I don't. Completely up to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my paper towel, just take some of the excess off. And I'm going to take some white. And I'm going to take that orange. Let me add a little bit of color in there. Let's see, maybe a little yellow. I'm completely making up what I'm doing right now. I'm just seeing what it looks like. Now this is going to be the lighter color of my clouds. So it looks like I want a little more red in there. looks pretty good. Lighten it up a bit. So this will be the highlights. Just want to dab a few shapes in here. I want to be pretty random with it. The more thought out it is, the less realistic it'll look. I'm just blending little circles just so those clouds don't look like they're cut out. So I like that. Go back in with that color. Maybe do a little bit over here too. Random shapes is the key. Blending. Really like how that's looking. I'm trying to keep the lighter edges of my clouds facing where the sun is. Like that sun is hitting that edge of the cloud, just brightening it up. Really like that. As you can see, some areas in the clouds have a little bit more of that red. That variety really makes it interesting and makes it look a little more realistic. If these clouds were all the same exact color, it wouldn't look very real. And it wouldn't look very interesting. All right. Also, if you hear any crunching or drinking noises, that's my cat Sammy. All right. Just adding a little bit of different highlights in there. All right. I like that. I think I will leave those clouds the way they are. You can also put some shadows in there. I don't think I need it though. I like where my highlights are. Whatever I have up here, I'm doing down in the water as well. Just eyeballing the general area of where I think those clouds are. For the most part, what you're doing in the water is exactly the same as what you did in the sky, with a little bit less detail. I want my sky to be the more detailed part, a little crisper. So the details in the water are going to be a little softer and there'll be less detail. So I'm just giving the idea of what is going on up in the sky. Just an idea. Okay. And I think that sky looks pretty good. I'm going to leave that the way it is. Now I will clean my brush off. You might have already cleaned your brush off a few times. That is fine. Sometimes I joke that it's more out of laziness than anything that I don't clean my brush. Once I am in painting mode, I don't want to stop and clean the brush. So I just keep going with the dirty one. Alright, my first layer in front of my sky, those mountains that are far away. I don't want the value of what my mountains are going to be the darkest I can go. I want the tree up front and the hill to be the darkest value. So if I want those faraway mountains to stand out against what's up close, or vice versa, I want these faraway mountains to be a little lighter. So I'm going to take my black, I'm going to add a little bit of blue, maybe a little bit of red. Generally, with faraway mountains, they start to have the color of whatever the sky is, especially the darker part of the sky. So if I take that bluish purple, just like that, add a little bit of white to it, yeah. Like I said before, I'm just making it up as I go, adding a little color here, a little color there, until I like what I see. Mainly I want the color to be darker than whatever it's going to lay against. So as long as it's darker than this part of the sky, it's going to look good. What I want to do, I'm taking my medium-sized brush now, because I want to get a little bit more detail, like with the treetops. So I am just quickly brushing in the shape of trees. I want to make sure I'm overlapping so I don't have any white showing. And I'm going to fill that in completely. Just like with the sky, if some parts are lighter than others, that will actually make it look more interesting. You don't want a solid block of color. I also want to vary the height of my hill so it's not just straight across. And down here, I'm going to use a little less paint and let that yellow show through a bit. It's okay if some of your paint takes on that texture of what the canvas is underneath. So you have those little holes and spots. Let your canvas do all the work, or do some of the work. So you see, as it gets in front of the sun, I'm going to let that yellow really show through. And then as it goes away from the sun, I'll darken it up again. Now as I start to paint that area where I want that tree to go, or at least what's going to be behind where the tree is, I really want to pay attention how dark I'm going, because I know the tree that I put in needs to be the darkest thing. And if I make this area just as dark, the tree won't stand out. So I want to be careful how dark I make this area. I want to make sure it's light enough. Alright, and then I'm just adding a few things here and there to these treetops. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time putting in each individual tree. Just want to get the idea of a hillside right here. I do want to adjust maybe the height a little bit. I want to let some of that sun poke through. Alright. I also see that I made this side of my mountain the same height as this side, so I want to adjust that a little bit. I'm gonna make one side just a little taller so it doesn't look too symmetrical. There we go. Blend that in a little bit. And then I want to soften these edges just a little bit because this is the background. So I don't want those details to be super sharp. I want them to look soft. So they kind of blend in a little bit. Don't want that to stand out too much. I want the things that are closer to be the details that you're paying attention to. Just dry brushing. Not really any paint on my brush. I'm just taking what's on the paper and moving it around a little bit. Okay, so I like that. A little more paint right there. Okay. And whatever I did up here, I need to do down here. See that it's a little bit darker and it's a little redder than I want. Remember, that's the nice thing about painting with acrylic is I can adjust directly on the canvas. I'll try to get straight across here. Okay. A little too red still. That's okay. And then let's do that trick here where I go sideways with it. Alright, and I just blocking in generally where those trees are. Not worrying too much if it's specifically, not worrying too much if it's exact. I'm going to blend a lot of this anyways. So I don't want to spend too much time worrying about each little detail. I apologize that often you're not able to see what I'm doing on my palette. It would be nice to figure out a multi-angle situation. But for now, just want to remind you that I'm just adding colors to whatever I'm doing, and I'm just making it up as I go. Making a lot of subconscious choices where I like see, oh well, I want that to be a little bit more red or a little bit more blue, and then I just add to it till I'm happy with it. And that kind of thing just comes with time, just knowing what type of colors you like to see in your painting. Alright. Making sure to overlap any of the white I had. Alright, and then if I flip it over again, alright, that's pretty close. Maybe I want to make that a little bit taller right here. I can see that didn't quite make that tall enough. So I'm going to just extend that a bit. And that is pretty close. Now what I want to do, I'm going to clean this brush I'm using. I'm just going to take the paper towel and just squeeze any of the paint off. And I am going to dry brush again. So I'm going to blend a little bit here. I'm going to make this look like it has a couple of ripples in the water. Just going with my brush, doing that dry brush. I'm scrubbing a little bit just to blend. Move that paint around a little bit. It might be a little dry. You want to do this while it's still a little wet. It still has a little bit of give to it. And this is going to make it look different than the sky. It kind of darkens it up. It adds a different type of texture. Just makes it look a little bit different. You can tell that that's water. Just adding a little bit of texture. Dry brushing it a little bit. And I like that. Okay. The last thing I want to do is I want to add my closer details that's in the foreground. So this hill and the tree. So I want to take just black. So I'll show you what I'm doing here. I'm just taking this black. And I still have my medium brush. Taking a lot of the black. And I want to map out where my hill is going to be first. So I want to just cover the rest of the white completely. Just taking as much black as it takes. Just covering up the unpainted part. And then go over as far as I want. In a little bit I'll take that smaller brush and add more grass detail. But as you can see, you're getting some interesting shapes. We're getting some interesting shapes with this medium brush. That's why I don't want to go with a small brush right away, because there's some interesting things you can do. And it looks spontaneous, it looks realistic, looks interesting. Okay, so that's about it for that hill. I'll come back in with the details in a little while. What I want to do now is put in that tree trunk, and every now and then I'll look at the drawing I made just as a reference to remind myself of where I put things originally. So I want to make sure that tree is fairly straight up and down. Don't want it leaning too much. And I'm just blocking it in. You see that that black really stands out against those lighter colors. And that wouldn't have happened if I would have made that dark sky color the same darkness, or the mountains. Wouldn't stand out. So I like that. Now I am going to go with the smallest brush to get some of those details. I want to have a couple limbs here. I want to put some needles on the limbs, like it's a pine tree. I'm going to take some water. I'm just going to wet my brush a little bit so I can thin out this black. I'm going to continue to wet it until I can move it around fairly easily. See that? Might test it on my palette a little bit. And then just want to start deciding where I'm going to put the limbs. I want to make sure they're fairly random and they have some interesting shapes to them. If the paint isn't moving around quite like you want, just thin it out with a little bit more water. I want to make sure the direction they're going in stays fairly random. They're not all in the exact same direction. That's going to look a little too thought out. When I go to the other side of my tree, I want to make sure I'm not doing the exact same thing. I don't want to have it perfectly symmetrical. I want it to look random. And the limbs are going to be a little thicker near the trunk, and as they go away from the trunk, they thin out. Alright, so those are my main branches. Now I want to put some limbs in. Alright, I want to start taking off from those main branches and just adding a couple small ones. Remember, if that paint is too thick, add a little bit more water. Alright. See how that black looks up against that brighter yellow and orange? That's a lot of contrast that we want. Alright. And then I can overlap some branches. Makes it look a little more interesting. I might put another, maybe a smaller one right there. I'm just wiggling that brush to get that interesting line quality. Right, maybe darken that up just a bit. And I'm just adding a few here and there. Until I'm happy with how many little limbs and branches I have. I want to make sure my branches go off the page, off the canvas. Maybe a few more. I don't want to overdo it, although it's pretty hard to overdo it with this technique. The more little limbs you put in, the more interesting it is, the more little shapes you get. But I also don't want to cover up too much of my sky. We put a lot of time and effort into that sky, and if we covered it up, it would be undone. That'd be a bummer. Alright. So I'm pretty happy with how that is. For some of you, this might be all you need. Maybe you really like how that turned out. And that is completely fine. If you want to just finish the tree like that. What I want to do, I want to add a few needles to my tree. Just a few little pieces of, whether it's leaves or needles, whatever you want, just to add some interesting shapes. Just a few here and there. And what I'm doing is I'm just taking that black, making sure it's pretty thin, and I'm starting at the limb or the branch and just making these little lines that go away from it. Making these little dashes just to add a little more texture. And some of these areas, the black might end up looking a little lighter. That is okay. You want some areas to be lighter and some to be darker. So if you're using a little less paint in some areas and a little more in others, it's actually a good thing. That way you've got some variety. Keeping it random. Add a little bit more water just so I can move it around a little easier. A few in here. Making it up as I go. If I were painting from a photo, I'd be a little bit more careful, and I'd be referencing what I see in that photo. But here, it's completely made up. I'm just trying to find that nice balance, but not too much where it's overwhelming to the viewer. And that all comes with trial and error. Like I said, I don't want that sky to be completely covered up. But if you overlap it with some of these shapes, it's kind of interesting how that sky pokes out. So you could do this as long as you want. You keep adding things and make that tree as full as you want. You could make a different kind of tree. You could put a pine tree in there, or a fir tree, or you could put a big bushy tree. But you want to be careful not to cover up that sky too much. That's the key. So I'm going to call that good for now. I might come back later after I finish this video and add a few things here or there. But at this point, you're just really adding little details that aren't necessarily going to make or break the painting. They're more just for your own taste. Alright, so I'm going to call that good for the tree. The last thing I want to do is add some blades of grass. So I'm taking my small brush again, and I'm using the same thickness of paint where I'm adding quite a bit of water just so I can move that paint around. And what I'm going to do, start near the bottom and then lift up. So as I go, those blades of grass get smaller near the ends of the blades, just like that. I want to give it a little bit of a curve, like the wind and gravity are pushing those blades of grass around a little bit. And I don't want them all to go in the exact same direction. I want them to overlap. I want them to twist and curve, because that's what grass does, especially out in nature. We don't want this grass to look like it was landscaped by a professional landscaper. I want it to look wild and crazy, just a little unruly. I want to make sure I'm overlapping things. Just want to blend some of those lines into the rest of the hill. Maybe have some way over here that are kind of going off the page where you can't see the rest of that hill. Now this is another thing where, just like the tree, I could keep going with this and add as much as I want, but I don't want to overdo it. I like those little shapes where that light pokes through. Makes it look like some critters could crawl through there, you know, some birds could fly in. It makes it look a little more realistic and a little more interesting. That's what we're trying to get at. And as you can see, I've got some nice layers here. I've got the sky, I've got the hills that are jumping out in front of that, and then I have this dark tree and hill that are in front of that. So that's going to do it for this painting. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have fun painting. See you next time.